Well, I mean, certainly, since this is my time of life with menopause, I mean, the slowing down of hormones does bring physical changes that can be unpleasant. And I don't want to discount those. And there are women who have, premenstrual dysphoric disorder or that hormones cause something like PCOS, which is polycystic ovarian syndrome. Hormones can cause trouble for people, but it's a small percentage of people. So for those people, I want them to be validated and I want them to be able to get help. But for the great majority of women, their naturally fluctuating hormones are not a source of extreme emotional states that they are not able to function in.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Trolling with Logic. This time it's an all-female cast because the men were a little bit too afraid of today's topic to actually join in the discussion. So with me today are Robyn Stein DeLuca, who is an author as well as a speaker and a coach. From her website, I'll just read out a couple of bits. Robyn Stein DeLuca, PhD, is a mother, sister, and daughter who grew up at a time when women's opportunities were expanding at an amazing rate. She wants women to continue to thrive in spite of gender politics and stereotypes that work to keep women from achieving their full potential. Her upcoming book, The Hormone Myth, How Gender Politics, Junk Science, and Lies About PMS Keep Women Down, will be released on August 1st, 2017, or in the UK here, it's the 28th of September, I believe. Her 2014 TEDx talk, Good News About PMS, has been viewed globally more than 1 million times and has been translated into 22 languages. So welcome, Robyn.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. Also with us today is Natalie, who you all know and love from Science Mums. So welcome, Natalie, as well.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited, Jenna, to finally get to talk to you. I've been on this show before, but you weren't here. So
I know I was ill. I'm ever so sorry.
Yes.
But I'll be seeing you again soon.
Yes.
I'll actually be seeing you in person at QED. And Natalie is doing a talk at QED. So if you guys haven't got your tickets yet, they're 109, which is very low considering the amount you get for the whole weekend, including the Skeptic Camp on the Friday. So get your tickets and come along. So Robyn, hormones. What can you tell us about what we might have in terms of misconceptions about hormones? Because a lot of us think of it in terms of you fall in love or it's that time of the month. But what really are hormones and what are their effects on us?
Well, usually when people talk about hormones, it's reproductive hormones that they're talking specifically about. And from a basically biological point of view, hormones are pretty fantastic little chemicals that they really create this symphony of biological processes that makes reproduction possible. And they regulate things like whether certain other hormones are released that will make your menstrual cycle happen. If you do become pregnant, hormones help create the placenta to nourish the baby. So these are really fantastic chemicals, but over the years, they've gotten a bad reputation. There's the idea that hormones in the course of a woman's normal biological processes will make her crazy, that monthly women get PMS and can be counted on to be crazy, even homicidal. They need large quantities of chocolate. When they get pregnant, people suspect that women have baby brain, that they lose their ability to think rationally, they lose their memory. And certainly in menopause, when women's hormones are going down, many people imagine that to be a time when women really go loony, or they just become so depressed, they just don't even want to do anything. And all of that is so far from the truth.
So like hormones serve biological functions, but then the idea around hormones has just been brought to another level. And so many things are attributed to hormones and not to any really good end, it seems like, for women.
Right. I mean, I want to acknowledge that hormones certainly bring some physical symptoms. Certainly lots of women get cramps, they bloat during their period, their breasts become tender. Hormones in menopause are largely responsible for hot flashes and a lot of physical changes. And I do acknowledge that they bring some emotional changes. What my big point is that these emotional changes are still within the normal range of behavior. That this ideal that people should not have moods or not get upset is completely unrealistic. And when people think of men, they think, oh, they embody that ideal. And they don't. Men have just as many mood changes as women.
Well, I was really interested when I was reading the book, when you were talking about PMS and things, the symptoms, that people usually attribute to PMS. And you have a whole list in the book that's anything from, changes in sleep to sweet and salty cravings, mood swings, joint pain, like all of these different things where anyone on any given day could probably have a symptom or two of PMS.
Right. I mean, I think just that phrase PMS has come to cover almost anything remotely negative that might be associated with having your period. And that's really unfortunate because when the prejudice that comes from thinking every woman has PMS, that comes from thinking it makes women emotionally irrational. It has nothing to do with thinking, oh, they're crampy or they want chocolate. So that's the big issue with PMS.
Well, you even said Dr. Oz claims that 85% of women experience PMS. Can you talk a little bit about the reality of, or maybe something that's a little different than what yes. Dr. Oz, our favorite knowledgeable TV doctor.
Oh my gosh. He just wears me out. Some of the stuff that he puts out there. Well, I can tell you that when PMS research was originally done, like you mentioned from my book, so many different symptoms were used to define it. So that made it really unreliable in coming up with estimates of who might experience this syndrome. And so psychologists did eventually get their acts together. In the early 1990s, PMS was rethought into a new disorder called PMDD, which stands for premenstrual dysphoric disorder. And that disorder has only 11 possible symptoms, and the woman needs to have 4 of them. And those symptoms include marked irritability, anxiety, depression, or mood swings, and some of the other physical symptoms that come along with the menstrual cycle. And not only does she have to have 4 of those symptoms, but they have to recur only in the week before she gets her period, and they have to disappear once she gets her period. And then the last criteria that psychologists came up with that really made this more specific is that it has to be observed at least 2 or 3 cycles in a row. And none of these tight criteria were ever applied to PMS in the past. So when we use these criteria, there are several recent studies that show it's somewhere between 3 and 8% of women who experience PMDD.
So that's a pretty small percentage, right, of women who are menstruating and experiencing all of these symptoms.
Right. The important aspect to it, and I think this is one of the general descriptors of a mental disorder. Does it affect your ability to function? And so while women may have some symptoms, generally most women get on with their day. They take care of their family, they do their job, they do what they need to take care of. So for the women who find it very difficult to take care of those responsibilities, that's the 3 to 8% we're talking about.
That's interesting. There was one time recently where I had, it was a very, very big story in the news with the trans in the military. And that's the first time that I really had a view of the kind of negative stereotypes that a lot of men attribute to menopause and hormones in general when it comes to women, especially because they were talking about, oh, well, you can't have trans in the military for the same reason that you can't have women in the military, because the hormones make you go crazy. They make you mean that you're not good on the front line. You can't possibly have hormone treatment, HRT, and be on the front line. And that's something that was very difficult to kind of combat in them. With HRT, is there any truth to HRT having an increase in kind of any of these sort of mental conditions? Or is that another myth that people are just simply throwing out there to delegitimize women and trans people in the military?
Well, I think we know that synthetic hormones, when people are taking those for reasons of birth control, they can affect mood. they can create some problems with some women, but it's not what I would say a broad issue. I think it's a pretty small percentage of people who respond that way from synthetic hormones. So to use that as a bludgeon, as a wide-ranging reason not to have transgender people in the military, that's really mistaken thinking.
Do you have any experience of the arguments against having women in the military or women in any other sort of combat roles?
Well, I think the people who are against women in the military, it's a very complex reasoning. There's a lot going on there. There's traditional ideas that men should be protecting women. So if a man feels he needs to protect a woman, but at the same time he's counting on her to provide cover in a violent situation, that he's going to be conflicted and not be able to function. I think that's some of the reasoning. I mean, there's also thoughts that women just can't do it, which is ridiculous because for so long, women have actually been in combat roles, even though they haven't officially been in combat roles. They've been in very dangerous situations that have been able to handle themselves very well. So I think when people are against it, usually it's not so much the physical, truly. I think it's a difference in idea of where women belong in the world.
And then do you think that there is any weight to the idea of, just, where women belong, but also feeling like women can't handle it in terms of the emotional toll that it would take because, we're these fragile emotional creatures.
Yeah, we're too emotional.
Right. Well, I think a lot of gender differences tend to disappear depending on context. And so when you don't have all the cues to activate those feelings, those actions, we tend to see gender differences really disappear. So I think there are some issues in terms of having men and women mixed in the military. There's some good protocols that have to be observed. You don't want to hear about the many cases of sexual assault. That's got to be dealt with. Men need to really learn that message that their comrades are not there to be raped. They are there to be active in the role of combat. So that's an issue that I think needs to be taken care of, or at least addressed more seriously so it doesn't happen as often. But as far as women being able to do the work and emotionally being steady enough and not too sentimental, one thing we know is there's a huge amount of overlap in the emotional lives of men and women. That certainly there are extremes at the edges, but there are many more similarities in how they process their emotions and where they go from there.
Is it true that men have a time of the month as well, and that is also hormonal?
That I do not believe. I don't think that men have a monthly cycle like women do biologically. I don't think there's a lot of evidence for that. But I will say there's a great study that was done a few years ago, and it examined men and women for between 4 and 6 months, which is a really long time for a study. Usually there's no money to do a study for that long. And it had people document their moods every day. And it turned out after that long period of time, the number of mood changes they had and the severity of their moods were no different by gender. So clearly everybody's going up and down. But we know that things like day of the week are much more influential than what time of the month a woman is at. I mean, obviously everybody's really happy on Friday and not so happy on Monday.
And so there's just natural fluctuations in mood and emotion and all of that. But then we have this thing where this, I guess, is it some kind of cultural norm or idea that women do experience this time of the month or whatever. And so whether that's a reason for blaming a woman for behaving a certain way or an excuse for, it's that time of the month, I'm crazy or something, because we maybe internalize that ourselves. Like, or is there a detriment to that myth being perpetuated?
Well, I think one of the big ones is that it does make people able to dismiss women's opinions. That if a woman is angry, if she's irritated about something, and you say, what is it, that time of the month? You've completely invalidated what she just had to say. And we see that even at high levels of power. I remember when Sonia Sotomayor here in the U.S. was up for confirmation as a U.S. Supreme Court justice. During her hearings, one radio show host mentioned, well, you better hope she doesn't have her major conferences at the wrong time of the month. We never know what we'll get then. And that was in 2009.
Well, and didn't Donald Trump say something about Megyn Kelly bleeding out of her wherever?
Mm-hmm. Yes, he did. And it was a way, he did not like the way she was aggressively questioning him. So it's a really convenient way to say, we don't need to listen to you. So in that way, the myth of PMS is really detrimental to women. And I do understand why some women do use it. I mean, one reason a lot of women say that they have PMS or that they feel like other people do is they've certainly received that message across their lives. I mean, I was in a playground once and heard a mother talking about a 7-year-old girl who was acting cranky. And the mom said, "Oh, I can't believe she's PMSing already."
Oh, man.
Which is crazy,
Yeah.
but it's the beginning. And, so you hear things enough and you internalize them. But there is something to it being a handy excuse if you feel cranky or angry. We don't think of women as being good if they are angry or cranky. A good woman is pleasant, is loving, is available to her family, always. And, we're human beings. We may not feel like being available. And to claim PMS or hormones, that's kind of a get out of jail free card that we get to use. And we don't have to engage the way we usually do, but we still kind of get to keep our good woman crown.
That's something that happens in the workplace quite a lot. I mean, in the workplace, a woman who is assertive quite often is seen as pushy, quite often seen as someone, a bit of a bitch. That's how it comes across. Whereas if a man does exactly the same thing, it's him being assertive, it's him being powerful, and it's real. Yeah,
that's
right.
It's a real conundrum for women who are pushing and who are ambitious, how to negotiate that in a way that will serve them well. It's really tough because you're right. There's that super fine line that in a man, it's powerful, but in a woman, oof, yikes, she's hard. That's a hard woman.
And to talk about even the comment of making comments about even young people, being emotional and whatever. We start, I guess, getting this idea that being a woman comes with this negative repercussion of having emotions and having whatever, hormones and whatever the myth is. But we don't want to start that so young. We want to try to raise strong women that aren't affected by this kind of societal myth, right? And so that's part of our job, I guess, as parents.
Absolutely. Parents, teachers are very powerful when it comes to these kinds of messages. I mean, here in the U.S., we get into 5th grade, the movie.
I remember the movie. My movie had a girl at a sleepover getting her period in the middle of the night. And the mom who was hosting the sleepover made pancakes in the shape of the woman's reproductive system.
Oh, that's fabulous.
So we knew in 5th grade that the pancake movie was coming.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's hilarious.
So this is how I started learning about my body through a breakfast food.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's funny.
But you get the movie and you're going to learn about it in some capacity. But And the companies that produce tampons and pads, they give teachers these nice little packages to give the girls so they can start them off as early customers. But in those packages, there's pamphlets. And they say things like, you can expect it'll be an emotional roller coaster. And we find that in books like the American Girl series has a book called something about getting to know your body. Oh, The Care and Keeping of You. And it says in there, you can expect that you'll be a little extra emotional at this time or that you might go haywire. And so these expectations, they feed into it. And as human beings, we don't do a very good job remembering why we feel something at a particular time. But when we think back, we think, oh, well, it must have been my period, must have been PMS, because it's in that general time frame. If you're upset, you're much more likely for it to be somebody pissed you off about something. And it'd be more useful to look to your environment to see what's going on.
How much do hormones affect women differently during pregnancy? And how much of what is attributed to hormonal reactions during pregnancy is actually simply because of the stress of actually having the child within you and being in a situation that is alien to what you would usually be going through on a day-to-day basis were you not pregnant?
Well, that's a good question. And I want to start off with saying that pregnant women overall are more mentally healthy than non-pregnant women. They are less likely to be hospitalized for a mental disorder. They're less likely to have anxiety and several other kinds of disorders. But there are some women who do have issues and are worried and feel emotional. And I would say certainly, it's a huge life transition to have a baby, especially the first time. And there's finances to think about. There's how you're going to manage your work situation. There's where you live. There's the mountains of stuff everyone's telling you need. If you were the youngest, I was the youngest in my family, I had no idea how to take care of a baby. So that was on my mind. So if a woman does happen to be worried or her memory maybe is not as strong, it could be because she's focused on those issues. But there has been a very large body of research done on the cognitive abilities of pregnant women. And the majority of them find no differences. The minority that do find differences find very small differences. And it's not something that needs to be fixed. It's not something that really needs to be addressed. But it definitely hurts women in the workplace because people do believe these things. They believe that, you're not going to be able to handle as much as you did before. Your brain just is not working as well.
Pregnancy brain, right, is what people call it. I remember being pregnant and people asking me, are you all forgetful now, experiencing pregnancy brain? And I didn't really know what they were talking about. And I was just like, I'm okay. And I didn't know if that was an okay thing to say. Like, I'm feeling all right. I know I have a baby inside me, but just trying to live life, But it's almost like there's this expectation that you should feel frazzled.
Right, that there's this role that you need to play.
Yeah, and it's hard because it's like, if you're not feeling that way, what are you doing wrong? because the idea out there being put on you is you should be worrying about so much stuff already before you even have the child.
Right, there's this culture that worry means you're good.
Yes.
That if you're worried about something, you must care an awful lot. And if you're not worried, you don't care enough.
Yeah. That it starts before you have the kid.
So how much research are you aware of in terms of the effects of heightened testosterone in women as opposed to heightened estrogen, heightened progesterone, et cetera, and the effects of that in terms of aggression?
To be honest, I don't know much about testosterone in women.
So kind of going back to the being pregnant and some of the issues that go along with pregnancy and childbirth and postpartum issues, something that is often brought up after you have a child is the idea of baby blues or postpartum blues, just as something that happens after you have a baby. Now, in the book, you talk about kind of the postpartum blues, but also postpartum depression, which is a real thing. But that's not just something that people can say, it'll pass. It's the baby blues. This seems like a place where some of the myths around hormones can actually hurt a woman.
Yes, I think it keeps women from getting help. There's a lot of confusion out there in the media. And I have to say, it still surprises me every time I see something so wrong that's in an article, a blog post, a magazine article. So I just want to give you kind of the basics on what happens to women after they have a baby in terms of emotions. There's 3 types of postpartum depression, per se. The first is postpartum blues, and that happens during the first 10 days after the baby is born. And a woman may feel tearful. She may not be able to sleep. She may just feel a general sense of being upset. And that is very largely due to the rapid decrease in hormones. But that is something that goes away on its own, and it doesn't have to be treated at all. She just needs a little tender loving care. Then there's postpartum depression. And what's meant by that title is it's the same as a depressive episode that a non-pregnant person has. They feel strong feelings of sadness. They have a hard time getting out of bed. They feel despondent, hopeless, may not be sleeping, may not be eating. And this usually requires some kind of treatment. And interestingly, this is not caused by changes in hormones. Lots of studies have looked at changes in hormones and this long-term postpartum depression, and there's not much of a relationship at all. The most important predictor of whether a woman is going to get this bigger depression is, was she depressed before she had the baby? That accounts for about 40% of postpartum depression cases. So I tell people, if you're feeling sad, if you're feeling upset, having a baby is not going to make you feel better. And second, it's her situation at home. What kind of social support does she have? Does she have family around? Does she have a friend who can come and let her take an hour for herself and take a shower? How is her spouse supporting her and caring for the baby? And how difficult is the baby? Some babies, God bless them, will sleep, for a few hours at a time, give you a break. And some babies don't. Some babies have colic. Some babies you don't know what to do with. So all of that is way more predictive of whether a woman is going to get depressed. And what she needs is either some talk therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, or antidepressants, and certainly a support group can be helpful too. And then there's the third kind, which is really rare. It's postpartum psychosis. And that's when a woman has a psychotic break with reality that occurs within the first month after she has the baby. She is hearing delusions, she's having hallucinations, she may be suicidal, and a very small percentage of these women may be a danger to their baby. And the person in the US who's probably most famous for having that sickness is Andrea Yates. She killed all 5 of her children because she believed the devil had possessed her, and the only way to save their souls from the danger that she brought was to kill them. And it was a really tragic case. But the worst thing is when in the news, they say that she had postpartum depression. That is not what she had. And saying that scares women. Anyone who has postpartum depression now is terrified. If I admit that I feel sad, does that mean people are going to think I'm that kind of woman who might kill my babies? And it keeps them from getting help. I just saw the other day, the lawyer who represented Andrea Yates said he wants to increase awareness about postpartum depression. And I just wanted to strangle him.
Oh, no.
And say, wrong. Good intentions, but really bad execution.
Well, because there's already enough of a stigma about if you have a child and you have any feelings, I think, of it being difficult or, life has changed a lot. And if you're struggling, especially to ask help in that context, does it make you less of sort of that good mother?
Right. There's this idea that mothering should just come naturally and you should love it. And if you don't, then, there's something wrong with you. Do you not really want that baby? All this questioning that goes on in your head.
That's interesting because there was a film the other day that my Portuguese friend recommended to me to watch called The Babadook. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's on this. I think it's kind of on the Andrea Yates side of things. There's a woman she's a single mother and she's going through a very difficult, very stressful time in her life, and she ends up having hallucinations and believing at one point that she's going to kill her son who's living with her. And it has that whole same feeling to it that you just described with this whole non-postpartum depression, but this whole sort of psychosis element.
Yeah, and it's something that's really different and only about 1% of women experience. So I really, that's one of the messages I so want to get out there, that is not postpartum depression. If you feel depressed, it's incredibly unlikely that you are going to have those other kind of psychotic symptoms, and there is help for you.
Of all the myths that you've come across and studied for your book, which do you think is the most damaging and harmful to the largest number of women in our countries today in the Western world?
Well, I'd have to say probably the myth of widespread PMS, because that covers the largest amount of women. I mean, we menstruate from the time, we're 12 years old up until maybe around 50, 55. So that covers a large part of our life that we are under suspicion, that our abilities, our capabilities, our emotional strength is questioned. And that affects us in our relationships. It affects us in our jobs. It keeps people try to keep women out of positions of power because of it. So I think that's probably the most dangerous.
And I think that probably rings true for other parts of the world as well. We had on the news recently, of course, that was it India or another country in that particular area? I'm afraid I'm not 100% certain which country it was, but there was recently a law passed to ban making women leave the house and live in a little shack when they were menstruating, which just seems absurd to us, of course. I mean, it's not like we would go live in the shed for the next week because you're menstruating, but in other parts of the world, there's this huge sort of fear almost around women menstruating. It's seen as unnatural, it's seen as sign of the devil, etc., etc. Incredibly negative.
Well, I think the power of menstruation and bearing a child has been threatening to men for a very long time. That, when human beings were just starting out there, what a mystery that a woman could bleed but not die. And that, something happened there that she could produce a child and that a man couldn't. So I think the tremendous power of that, and it appears in some societies, it still is very threatening to men.
Well, even, do you remember there was a woman runner in one of the big, like a big race or something, and she had her period, and there were pictures. Do you remember there were pictures of her like with blood on the front of her shorts or whatever? And that was like a controversial thing to some people because, well, her body was just doing what it does. But we have this idea that, well, I don't really care, but there seems to be this idea still that it's something to be looked on with a little bit of disgust. And I mean, I would like to see, I guess, the girls that are growing up now feel just better generally about their bodies and what our bodies are capable of doing.
Right. I think you make a good point that there is a lot of shame surrounding menstruation. I mean, I will admit, when I work in an office, if I've got to take a tampon with me to the bathroom, I shove it in my pocket. I don't just hold it in my hand. I'm not comfortable doing that. And I know the reactions of people will be, whoa, oh my goodness, she's putting that out there, huh? But I think that millennials especially are changing the way people think about this. The whole period positivity movement, I think, is catching hold. And I love the fact that girls are hearing more about their menstruation as this fantastic physical function they have. And that if you're menstruating regularly, it means you're healthy. It means your body's working the way it should be.
Yeah. And that there shouldn't necessarily be shame about, you have your period and, your partner should, if you have a sexual partner, it's still okay to have intercourse or do whatever during that time of the month too. Like you don't have to just put yourself in a little figurative shack for a week.
Right. And it'd be great to see that, to see people just thinking more matter-of-factly about it and have it less be this taboo kind of thing.
I've only experienced that in a very small way. Being transsexual, of course, I've never had I've never had menstruation myself. However, I did bleed constantly for about a year after my operation because I had an issue with granulation tissue. And during that time, there was occasions where I had to speak with other people and ask them for tampons when I'd run out or pads. And I would get a look of fear in their eyes when I asked them for it. If it was just like matter of fact, it's this kind of conversation that you have privately. It's not like, do you have something in your bag that can help me with this? There was a look of fear. It's just like, well, you shouldn't be saying that out loud. And it's kind of a whispered conversation. And you go into the hallway and you pass the tampon to the other person as if you're dealing drugs. It's bizarre.
Mm-hmm. It is strange. And it's funny. I find a little bit something like that with menopause now. I'm menopausal and I'm getting hot flashes. And I talk about it because it's hard not to talk about when you're just suddenly sweating and feeling hot. And some people I can see are a little bit put off about me actually saying the words that I'm having hot flashes.
Well, one thing that you talk about in your book, too, around the idea of menopause is just how it is. I think you wrote the menopausal profit monster and how just like companies have grabbed onto the idea of menopause and, perpetuating all these ideas of what it is and what you need to do to, I guess, fend it off in some ways. Like, can you talk a little bit about the cultural ideas around menopause, too?
Sure. I mean, a lot of it is connected to the negative feelings about aging, that anything associated with aging, especially for a woman, you got to fight against it. You got to fight against those wrinkles. You got to dye your hair. You got to, make sure your body is the way it was 40 years ago, which is nuts, which nobody can do unless you have surgery, I guess. I don't know. So that's a piece of it, that women have a responsibility to stay young looking. And so menopause is an incontrovertible piece of evidence that you are getting older. So there's that piece of it. But also, certainly, so much money has been made convincing women that menopause is not a natural stage of life, but a sickness. It's a hormone deficiency is the way it's been described, where if you don't replace those hormones, you are not only going to have your health threatened, but you are going to become this old cow, this just kind of person who is depressed, who's not active in the world, who is not attractive for sure. You're going to have saggy skin, and this is something you need to deal with. And getting that message to women has brought billions and billions of dollars, and I am not exaggerating, to pharmaceutical companies who market hormones, and also now the supplement industry, which is completely unregulated. And there are many companies producing supplements that are supposed to help you treat your menopausal symptoms.
And how effective are those supplements, really?
Few and far between. Some of them have had a few studies done on them, but there's no wide body of literature to look at to say whether these are effective in helping women with either if it's hot flashes or vaginal dryness or things like that. But they also claim to help with the emotional side of things, which is a pretty big claim. And so there's no agency checking up on them.
The one thing that I've taken out of HRT, because of course it's something that I've been told that I have to take for the rest of my life, is the idea that it helps with osteoporosis, that it helps with the uptake of calcium, and if you don't have enough of one hormone or the other in your system, then that can cause you to get brittle bone syndrome and that kind of thing. Is that true? That's the only reason I take HRT myself.
Yes, that is something that I think in the larger studies on women and hormones, it was found that it can help out with osteoarthritis and osteoporosis. But there are other things that a person can do either in combination with that or besides it in terms of weight-bearing exercise, diet. All of these can influence your bone density. So that there's definitely more to do. And we're getting some research now that seems to say that hormone replacement therapy can be used for short periods of time for menopausal women who are experiencing symptoms so much that it's threatening their ability to function. There seem to be these windows of opportunity that you can take them, get benefit, and it won't increase your chances of getting breast cancer or heart disease, as the previous studies showed. But they seem to be very specific windows.
Are there any things that sound like myths in terms of hormones that are actually true? Are there any things that you have come across and investigated that turned out to be actually, this is a thing?
Well, certainly, since this is my time of life with menopause, the slowing down of hormones does bring physical changes that can be unpleasant. And I don't want to discount those. And there are women who have, premenstrual dysphoric disorder or that hormones cause something like PCOS, which is polycystic ovarian syndrome. Hormones can cause trouble for people, but it's a small percentage of people. So for those people, I want them to be validated and I want them to be able to get help. But for the great majority of women, their naturally fluctuating hormones are not a source of extreme emotional states that they are not able to function in. So just as, we kind of want or hope that younger women can start to embrace the changes that they go through in their bodies and feel comfortable with their period and with all of that goes along with just being a woman. How can we get women kind of on the other side of things, the menopausal age women, to embrace that part of their life without necessarily feeling like, oh shit, this is just going to be awful or whatever, or that I've reached this different sort of end point or whatever. Because there's so much life there, and a lot of good at that point, I imagine. So how can that narrative get changed? Right. Well, that is one of the biggest messages that I want to get out there, that women have so much to look forward to, that women in their 50s and 60s are really happy. They are some of the happiest women on the planet. They have very low rates of major depression. They are happy because they don't have to worry about pregnancy. So that's kind of a nice thing. They have, usually this time of life coincides with the empty nest. So you have more time to focus on interests that you have. And many women talk about how good it feels to know who they are and it's very easy to push aside things that are trivial, that maybe they thought were important when they were younger. They feel more confident in their choices. So I would love to get that message out there to women that there's so much to look forward to in terms of confidence, happiness. I mean, there's a great study that compared women who were premenopausal and postmenopausal. And they asked the premenopausal women, and this was years before they had any menopausal symptoms, how bad do you think menopause is going to be? Where a 0 would be no problem at all, and a 5 would be the worst thing ever. The average response was a 4. These women were worried. They thought this was going to be the worst thing really that ever happened. It was going to be physiologically difficult, emotionally difficult. And then they asked women who were postmenopausal, who had gone through the whole process, and their average response was a 2.5. It was a bump in the road. It was something they had to deal with at times, but not very important in terms of their happiness. So I really want younger women to feel good about what will happen when they get into their 50s and 60s, that there's so much opportunity to use that wisdom that they've accrued to pursue interests that they find exciting, and that their bodies are still going to be working. It'll be a little bit different, but their bodies are still going to function well.
See, I like that. I like that positive message being able to be put out there, because I feel like probably in just a lot of what we talk about when it comes to issues of health, or gosh, so much. I mean, I feel like we always are given in the larger culture and media the more fear-based extremist narrative of everything, kind of the worst case scenario, or things you should be worried about or afraid of. And to have a different narrative out there, I think seems really important, especially when it comes to our ideas about ourselves and our bodies and, just how we're living our day-to-day existence.
Yeah, I mean, that's the media, clickbait and, sensationalistic headlines are what media outlets are more likely to put out there. So that's part of the problem, that, they want to trumpet differences between men and women because similarities are thought to be boring. And they want to trumpet what's going to hurt you, what's going to bother you, rather than you're going to feel great at this point in your life. So I think, we've got to turn that around. We have to participate in putting out this positive information out there.
I know quite a lot of fathers out there, especially single fathers, who are quite nervous about discussing hormones with their young children, especially when those young children are going into puberty. I know from conversations with a few that I'm friends with, that because they don't have an experience of female hormones themselves, and because they have these negative impressions about estrogen and its effect on the body and its effect on the mind, that they don't really know how to have that discussion with their daughters. What do you think is the best way for them to broach the subject? Should they be going to somebody else, as they frequently do, like a woman, to ask them to teach their children about it? Or is there a way that they can easily broach that subject themselves?
Well, I think it can be a combination of those. Certainly any man who's interested can get educated. Find a lot of different sources to learn about the menstrual cycle, what it means, how it works, what's great about it. Allow for that possibility, even that there could be something great about it. And certainly confer with female friends that you trust their judgment. Your thinking is aligned with theirs in a way, and in the way that you want to raise your child. So I think a combination of things probably is a good approach, certainly better than saying nothing. Because saying nothing is saying something. It's letting the larger culture take the lead.
And also, it makes a sort of a gulf between the father and the daughter as well, as if, we're so different. When we grow up, it's going to be even more different. And then, we won't be able to discuss things with each other. Whereas if you actually try and bridge that gap, then it gives you something to talk about. It gives you sort of a trust, a way to get to know each other a little bit better.
Absolutely. I think fathers can have a tremendous effect on their daughters' lives, and show them respect, show them they deserve respect, and appreciation for how their bodies work.
And thinking back to, when I was in my 5th grade, menstrual cycle period pancake video watching with just all the other girls in my class, and the boys were off doing their own video about something else. Like, we were separated. We learned about our own bodies and what was going to happen. Do you think that there should be more education where girls are learning about what happens to, a boy, and boys what happens to girls? Like, should all of that start sooner, just to be more open about just, I don't know, what happens as we develop.
I think that would be a wonderful approach and would take a lot of the stigma out of it, that it's not something so awful that we have to hide it from the boys. And I think boys would like to be educated. Many men tell me they didn't learn about this stuff even when their sisters were having their periods. It was a hidden thing. It was not talked about. They had no idea what it was like. I was interviewed by a man a couple of weeks ago about the book. And he said, I have absolutely no idea. And I was like, well, it's not that complicated. You could get an idea. So I think the earlier we expose boys and girls to this more matter-of-factly, the better. But, as a parent, you have to watch out at every stage. When one of my daughters was in 9th grade and was taking biology, her male biology teacher was teaching about the reproductive system. And he felt compelled to talk about PMS, which he called poor man syndrome.
Oh, my goodness. Oh,
exactly.
Oh,
exactly.
That's like just face palm. I'm embarrassed and mortified for him to even say something that awful.
The screams that came out of me were legendary. So really at every level, the way our children are being educated has to be looked at, has to be focused on and addressed, because this is not appropriate. This is not correct, number one. And this is not a message that you want teachers giving boys and girls. He's teaching boys and girls that something happens to women that is really annoying for men.
Man, well, at least, so your daughter, she knew enough to say or to come home and tell you this, he said this, and this is wrong. See, and I think that that's hopeful for the next generation of people, that, like, you even mentioned it towards the end of your book, that now it's, millennials and younger people are sort of putting aside the more traditional gender roles and gender binary and all of that. So maybe that is a place of hope for some of these myths.
I think so. I mean, we still have to pay attention to it for sure. This is not going to go away on its own, but there's definitely some good trends going on.
I'm just trying to think of another question I have, but I think all my questions have pretty much been answered already. And unfortunately, I haven't had the opportunity to read the book yet, but I'd definitely be getting it when it's released on the 20th of September. Natalie, did you have any other points that you wanted to raise?
No, I think I'm looking at some notes I took. I think we kind of went through all of them, but Robyn, I think it's a really good book. I mean,
thank you.
I read it in just like a couple sittings, and I think it's just important to get out there that that we really have internalized so much of this just as a fact of life. And I know personally, I just assumed PMS is a fact of life. It's it's a thing we all have and whatever. But I did always kind of wonder about how it was used kind of against or as an excuse or as, a way to shame somebody too. So, we want to be able to get away from somebody like Donald Trump being able to say, oh, she's bleeding,
Mm-hmm. So now we could just ignore her.
Yeah. And clearly that should not be happening. And I don't know. I really did appreciate the menopause stuff too, just because I'm not anywhere near there right now, but just to have that out there, because I think that that's an important thing for women to read.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're so programmed to fear aging that we just can't even imagine what that future looks like. And, I'm 52 years old and I am loving life. Let me tell you, life is good.
Another thing that you do as well, if I understand correctly, is you coach people as well. So you coach women in dealing with difficulties in the workplace and also with emotions and empowerment in terms of getting what you need and making sure that you bridge the gap between, if I understand it correctly, there's a huge gap between men and women in the workplace in many, many ways. Women have to take leave often to raise children, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this is kind of stigmatized often, and women are then put back in their careers as a result of that. But you try and help with that. Is that correct?
Yes, I certainly want to help women think outside of the traditional gender role box when looking at their lives and how to manage their lives. How can, it's such a cliche when Hillary Clinton said it takes a village, but it really does take a village to run a life. And I don't think women should feel bad about galvanizing all of the people in their lives to participate in making it possible. And if you've got parents around, you've got a spouse, you've got a partner, your children, everybody can participate in a way that your time is respected. And I think it's important for children to be raised thinking that their mother's careers are just as important as their father's careers, and that there might be a turn taking as far as one of you is working really hard at one point and the other one is picking up the slack at home, that could be a really empowering thing for a child to learn.
Well, and
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think it's important for children to see that their parents are satisfied and fulfilled as their own people outside of just being parents too. And so that comes with being able to take time for yourself when needed, or have other people, just help out in the kids' lives. And I think it provides a nice, well-rounded experience for children too. Absolutely.
And then when it's their turn to raise children, if they're going to, they've got this nice model that they don't have to be these super sacrificing martyrs, that's not the only way to be a mother.
What do you think is the most difficult thing for a woman who's really, really wanting to further her career to combat, especially in sort of a corporate environment?
Well, I mean, it could be the perception, if she has a family, it could be the perception that she might not even get asked to do certain assignments because of the assumption that she won't want to put the time in if it's something that requires an additional amount of time. It's those assumptions that take us out of the game before we even begin, I think, that are most hurtful. When coworkers decide for you how to live your life and limit your opportunities because of these preset ideas of there's only one way to be a mother. So of course you'll want to leave at 5:01 p.m. and we won't give you this assignment that could further your career. I think that's one of the difficult things that women go up against. Still traditional ways, even though so many more women are working, people still think women are responsible for the family, and that they either choose not to manage or don't want to manage additional responsibilities.
Do you have any projects coming up that you can tell us about? Anything else that you're really interested in at the moment that you would like to sort of shout out and prepare people for the future?
Sure. Thank you for asking. Well, in terms of my coaching, I'm preparing workshops for couples who are getting ready for their first baby to come, because research shows that marital satisfaction goes way down after the birth of a first child. And a lot of why that happens has to do with unmet expectations, that each person thought it was going to be different than how it turned out. So I want couples to have upfront conversations about what's their ideal vision of parenting, what's their ideal vision of their couplehood, and how to negotiate whose career is going to be put on hold, how you take turns about that, how you're going to who's going to make the bottles or do the laundry, and then how to have a kind of a safety button to hit if you feel like things are getting out of control. If things are escalating and maybe you're both sleep deprived and just really on edge, what are the emotional tools that you can use to kind of bring yourself back on track, to focus on what's great about your relationship? So that's something I'm working on. And also I want to provide coaching for women in the postpartum who are having difficulties managing what life is bringing and just need some guidance in ways to maybe change their standards. That's one way to do it. How to engage with other people so they can bring more support into their lives and get to a place where they are feeling satisfied with their daily lives.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. I think we all know somebody, probably in our own families, who has issues with sort of sharing the load as far as parenting goes and having their first child. So that sounds really interesting. Really good.
Yeah, thank you, Robyn, for talking to us about all this. And it sounds like you're doing just some really good work for women and for some of the ideas that have been put out there in the world. So we appreciate the work you do.
All right. Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
That's brilliant. Well, that's been our Trolling with Logic for today. Thank you very much to our guest, Robyn, and also to Natalie for joining us today. As we said before, QED is coming up in October, and hopefully we'll see a lot of you there. Is there anywhere where people can see you, Robyn, in the near future and come and speak to you about what you're doing?
Well, I will be speaking at Stony Brook University on September 26th about the raging hormone myth. And they can also go to my website, DeLucaInsight.com.
That's fantastic. Natalie, is there anything that you'd like to add on the end of the show?
No, just really happy to be here. Can't wait to meet you next month at QED and hopefully see a lot more of our friends over in the UK.
Oh, indeed.
So, yeah.
It's going to be brilliant. Well, thank you both for joining us. And that's our show for today.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Trolling with Logic. If you enjoy this podcast, please consider leaving us a review on iTunes. If you love the show, please consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Supporting us at $5 or more per episode will get you access to exclusive, patron-only bonus content, early access to shows before everyone else, and other incentives. We are an amateur production, but with your patronage, we can help improve our audio quality and cover the costs for doing the show. We are grateful for anything you can pledge to the show. Go to www.patreon.com/trollingwithlogic to sign up if you are so inclined. We want to thank our 4 patrons who currently have chosen to support us. These patrons are Microbloganism, Josh at the Society for the Advancement of Science, Avinash Kumar, and Brian Curran. Thank you very much for your support, which is helping us out. If you have any suggestions for topics or guests you would like to hear on this show, let us know on Twitter or on our Facebook page. Thanks again for listening.
Many things are attributed to hormones and not to any really good end, it seems like, for women.
Right. I mean, I want to acknowledge that hormones certainly bring some physical symptoms. Certainly lots of women get cramps, they bloat during their period, their breasts become tender. Hormones in menopause are largely responsible for hot flashes and a lot of physical changes. And I do acknowledge that they bring some emotional changes. What my big point is that these emotional changes are still within the normal range of behavior. That this ideal that people should not have moods or not get upset is completely unrealistic. And when people think of men, they think, oh, they embody that ideal. And they don't. Men have just as many mood changes as women.
Well, I was really interested when I was reading the book when you were talking about PMS and things, the symptoms, that people usually attribute to PMS. And you have a whole list in the book that's anything from
Hello and welcome to another episode of Trolling with Logic. This time it's an all-female cast because the men were a little bit too afraid of today's topic to actually join in the discussion. So with me today are Robyn Stein DeLuca, who is an author as well as a speaker and a coach. From her website, I'll just read out a couple of bits. Robyn Stein DeLuca, PhD, is a mother, sister, and daughter who grew up at a time when women's opportunities were expanding at an amazing rate. She wants women to continue to thrive in spite of gender politics and stereotypes that work to keep women from achieving their full potential. Her upcoming book, The Hormone Myth, How Gender Politics, Junk Science, and Lies About PMS Keep Women Down, will be released on August 1st, 2017, or in the UK here, it's the 28th of September, I believe. Her 2014 TEDx talk, Good News About PMS, has been viewed globally more than 1 million times and has been translated into 22 languages. So welcome, Robyn.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming.
Things like whether certain other hormones are released that will make your menstrual cycle happen. If you do become pregnant, hormones help create the placenta to nourish the baby. So these are really fantastic chemicals, but over the years, they've gotten a bad reputation. There's the idea that hormones in the course of a woman's normal biological processes will make her crazy, that monthly women get PMS and can be counted on to be crazy, even homicidal. They need large quantities of chocolate. When they get pregnant, people suspect that women have baby brain, that they lose their ability to think rationally, they lose their memory. And certainly in menopause, when women's hormones are going down, many people imagine that to be a time when women really go loony or they just become so depressed, they just don't even want to do anything. And all of that is so far from the truth.
So like hormones serve biological functions, but then the idea around hormones has just been brought to another level. And so
also with us today is Natalie, who you all know and love from Science Mums. So welcome, Natalie, as well.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited, Jenna, to finally get to talk to you. I've been on this show before, but you weren't here. So
I know I was ill. I'm ever so sorry.
Yes.
But I'll be seeing you again soon.
Yes.
I'll actually be seeing you in person at QED. And Natalie is doing a talk at QED. So if you guys haven't got your tickets yet, they're 109, which is very low considering the amount you get for the whole weekend, including the Skeptic Camp on the Friday. So get your tickets and come along. So Robyn, hormones. What can you tell us about what we might have in terms of misconceptions about hormones? Because a lot of us think of it in terms of you fall in love or it's that time of the month. But what really are hormones and what are their effects on us?
Well, usually when people talk about hormones, it's reproductive hormones that they're talking specifically about. And from a basically biological point of view, hormones are pretty fantastic little chemicals that they really create this symphony of biological processes that makes reproduction possible. And they regulate, well, I mean, certainly, since this is my time of life with menopause, I mean, the slowing down of hormones does bring physical changes that can be unpleasant. And I don't want to discount those. And there are women who have, premenstrual dysphoric disorder or that hormones cause something like PCOS, which is polycystic ovarian syndrome. Hormones can cause trouble for people, but it's a small percentage of people. So for those people, I want them to be validated and I want them to be able to get help. But for the great majority of women, their naturally fluctuating hormones are not a source of extreme emotional states that they're not able to function in.